Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelenskyy are to meet on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. They met at the White House last month, and Ukraine's president emerged reassured from there by a US commitment to security guarantees. But as the Russian bombardment continues each night in Ukraine, those guarantees still remain vague. The Ukraine leader seizes the chance then to be face-to-face with the US president and try to build on their relationship, much improved since the February the 28th low point. Let's bring in Gulliver Cragg, our Ukraine correspondent, joining us live from Kyiv. Gulliver, good evening to you. Zelenskyy then grabbing every chance to meet with Trump. His message, though, very likely to remain exactly the same.
Yes, they've actually met already, and judging by the remarks that they made in front of the cameras, it looks like they were getting along pretty well. Donald Trump singled out Ukraine for praise for its bravery after Volodymyr Zelenskyy informed him that Ukraine has retaken 360 square kilometers just in the past month from Russia. Those gains are mostly in the northeast in Sumy region, where Russia has apparently given up on creating a buffer zone there. But that's also because they needed the Russians to send the forces down to the Donbass, where the Ukrainians are counterattacking as well. So Zelenskyy trying to impress Trump, and it seems to have worked. Also, well, I'm sure many leaders, and probably Zelenskyy, no exception, in private, will have been aghast at some of the untruths that Donald Trump said in that rambling speech. The Ukrainian president was able to seize on the things that he does really agree with Donald Trump about and is grateful to Donald Trump for, and that is in particular the United States putting pressure on NATO allies to spend more on defence, particularly the European ones. They're not spending as much as Donald Trump appears to think they are, but they are increasing spending significantly. That's something Ukraine has been calling for years as well. And then also the American pressure on European countries to stop buying oil and gas. Donald Trump's words, they're paying for the Russian war effort against Ukraine effectively, are actually things that we've been hearing in Ukrainian rhetoric ever since 2022 and even before then. Music to the ears of Volodymyr Zelenskyy to hear him, the US president, putting so much pressure on the Europeans to stop buying Russian oil and gas. Of course, as Ursula von der Leyen said, I think it was earlier today, they have very drastically reduced their purchases of Russian oil and gas. But France, for example, still spent more than 6 billion euros on Russian gas last year. The big offenders in terms of the percentage of their energy needs that are still met by Russia are, of course, Hungary and Slovakia. So another thing that Volodymyr Zelenskyy will have been pleased to hear was Donald Trump saying he was going to talk to Viktor Orban, his friend, the Hungarian Prime Minister, and try to see if he can persuade even him to stop being so dependent on Russia. I mean, some analysts would say good luck with that. Hungary doesn't show much sign of being willing to budge. Slovakia perhaps a little bit more pliable.
Gulliver, does Zelenskyy have the backing of the Ukrainian people with this kind of diplomatic move he's making?
Well, I think that he has very, very little criticism for his approach on the international stage, generally putting the Ukrainian case, and to Donald Trump in particular. What else can he do? Even if, despite the encouraging rhetoric we heard this evening, the bottom line is the United States still doesn't appear to be willing to increase sanctions on Russia, which is what the Ukrainians really want. Marco Rubio said today that they would be jeopardizing their role as a mediator, I think, if they tightened sanctions. So maybe he doesn't really get very far in terms of concrete results, but there's very little criticism of him at home about his approach in the diplomatic arena. Where there is criticism, and it's caused his approval ratings to take a little bit of a dent, but they're still at about 68%, is on domestic politics, and particularly the so-called fight against corruption. I say so-called because more and more of Zelensky's critics are saying that he isn't really trying to fight corruption at all. If you remember this summer, a law was passed hobbling the country's anti-corruption agencies. There were protests in the streets and the law was withdrawn. But on the same day that that law was passed, one of the leading detectives of the National Anti-Corruption Bureau and his father were arrested. They're still in detention without having gone to trial and without any convincing evidence having been produced. I was at the court today where he was appealing against his pre-trial detention, and the judge threw out about the appeal. Now, the Ukrainian security services says that they have got convincing proof of wrongdoing on the part of this detective. But what I heard in the court today, the arguments from the defence were very convincing indeed. The arguments from the prosecution weren't comprehensible at all. And it's very hard to understand why, even if this detective is guilty of some kind of crime, he has to be kept in pre-trial detention. It's not like he's being accused of murder or something like that. And so Zelensky's critics, anti-corruption activists, are really ringing the alarm bells louder and louder, saying that this is persecution of the main anti-corruption bureau, one of its leading detectives, and that it's designed to create a chilling effect on all those who would investigate corruption in the current Ukrainian administration.
Gulliver Cragg, thank you for keeping us up to date with all developments on the situation in Ukraine. And of course, we're watching for diplomatic moves after that meeting between Trump and Zelensky, which, as Gulliver quite rightly points out, has happened. And we're awaiting more news from that. Gulliver Cragg, as always, thank you very much indeed.